the main message from left-leaning media, I say this as a journalist, is that men are terrible. If men are struggling in society, I say this in Extinction, men are basically told to go cry into a pillow silently, and left-leaning media doesn't care. The 3 6s refer to a man who is over 6 feet tall, makes over 6 figures in annual income, and has a penis that is over 6 inches long. So basically, the idea is if you are dating a man who does not meet all 3 of these criteria, you're wasting your time. This is what the message is to women. And like you said, the number of men in America who meet all 3 of these 6s in terms of this criteria is, when I did the calculation, it was maybe 1%. And then when you factor in personality, being straight, unmarried, and then chemistry and all these other factors that would be important when it comes to dating and relationships or marriage, that whittles it down to an even smaller percentage. I think if both men and women were just honest about what they really want during sex, we would prevent all of this, because choking can be fatal. It can lead to loss of consciousness, which can lead to brain damage. It can lead to permanent mental health issues down the line, like dissociation, depression, anxiety. And it's showing that it can also lead to cortical swelling, so there's inflammation in the brain after being choked. And just so your audience has an idea of how prominent this is, of university students, of women, half have experienced this. A quarter of them have experienced this by the age of 14. A third of them have experienced this more than 5 times. So it's very, very common.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show, brought to you by, as always, Skeptic Magazine. Hey, here's the new issue. Check it out, skeptic.com/magazine. Yes, UFOs, UAPs, it's all another form of religion, in my opinion. But you can check that out. Also, this is brought to you by Big Nerve, which is the platform for the Skeptic Society, where we are hosting discussions and debates. And Big Nerve is a company that's putting money up. You can win money by participating in these debates, basically just talking to me and other people about a lot of the topics on this show. So check it out, skeptic.bignerve.com/welcome, or just skeptic.bignerve.com, and you'll find it. All right, my guest today is Dr. Debra Soh, returning champion. She's a neuroscientist who specializes in human sexuality and biological explanations for behavior. She received her PhD from York University in Toronto and worked as a scientific researcher for 11 years. She has spoke at Oxford Union about her first book, The End of Gender, which she was on this show for. And she and I have also done public events about this topic in her book at Freedom Fest. That book was translated into 6 languages and was featured in the Daily Wire's film, What is a Woman? Did that question ever get answered? I think that question has always been answered. But that's kind of what that book is about. How did this become a thing? As a journalist, Dr. Soh writes about technology, health, and the politicization of science, and her writing has appeared in the Globe and Mail in Toronto, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, Harper's Magazine, and many other publications. You can read about her at drdebrasoh.com. No period after doctor, just drdebrasoh, S-O-H.com. Here's the new book, Sextinction, The Decline of Sex and the Future of Intimacy. And by the way, it's also on, hang on for a second here, it's also on audiobook, because here is my version. I was just listening to it again, second time the last 2 days, Deborah. It's so good. You're such a good writer. And of course, I mean, who doesn't like reading about sex, right? I mean, come on.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you for having me back.
It's almost a clickbait title and cover, but it's a serious subject. So a couple of different topics, I guess, come to mind. There's the lack of sex to the point of a lot of Western countries being below the replacement level. What is that? 2.1 children per woman. Mm-hmm. And aren't there countries like Japan and South Korea that are like 1 or even less than 1? Yeah,
in the U.S. it's about 1.6 right now.
1.6 in the U.S. Yeah. Okay. So. I grew up as a baby boomer with the whole Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb, and we're doomed. And then that never happened. Somehow humans found a way to feed billions of more people. But now the concern seems to be the other direction. Not enough people. So I gather you're following some of that as well, along with your research on sex.
Yeah, so I was quite skeptical in the beginning when I first started hearing about the sex recession, because a study came out in 2016 that was the first time showing that Americans were having less sex than ever before, and since then there have been multiple studies coming out showing that this is a phenomenon that's happening not just in the West, but it's happening in the East as well, as you mentioned, like Japan. It's happening in all developed countries. It doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter if you're married or single, but it's especially prevalent among younger generations like millennials and Gen Z. And the statistic I kept coming across is that roughly 1 in 3 men and 1 in 5 women have not had sex in the past year. So my reason for writing Sextinction, initially when I sat down, I wanted to see, is the sex recession real? I do think it is. And the more research I did, the more scientific studies I read, the more I realized that this is actually quite concerning. And it's not just necessarily about sexuality and sexual inactivity, but also what that represents more broadly about human connection, emotional intimacy. And also my fear is that many of the consequences that we have experienced as a result of being unprepared for, say, social media and screens, I see the same problems repeating themselves in the future with regard to some of the technologies that are coming in to replace human sexual activity. So things like AI girlfriends and boyfriends, which I know is something you've talked about in the past, sex robots as that technology advances. Social media is also creating this divide between men and women. So if you're single, you've likely come across this content that is really with the goal, I think, of driving men and women apart. It's also affecting sexlessness in married people's marriages and making them less interested in having sex with their regular partner. And also things like endocrine disruptors, environmental toxins, low testosterone, the birth control pill, egg freezing, IVF. So all of these supposed solutions that are with the goal of helping people buy time to delay family planning, which I think is understandable, especially in today's climate, and everyone is struggling financially, but we're not addressing the underlying problem. And I think on many levels, this is a larger issue regarding mental health and hormonal issues that aren't being addressed. So the book really tries to be comprehensive and looking at every possible explanation. And I also wrote it with the goal of speaking to single people who may be very frustrated with the dating climate and saying, why is dating today more difficult than it's ever been? Even for married people, because married people are also experiencing high rates of sexlessness, and also for parents, because I'm very concerned about how this technology and these social changes are affecting children's development. Because like we see with screens, they are affecting, say, brain development, they're affecting attention, they're affecting emotional regulation and mental health. In Gen Z in particular, they really are experiencing a mental health crisis. Anxiety is extremely high among Gen Zers. Roughly half of Gen Zers have a diagnosed mental health condition, and 90% of those with a diagnosis have anxiety. Depression is also at an all-time high right now. So when we look at how, mental health is such a huge part of life and just enjoying life, and I am, like I said, concerned that we may make the same mistakes as we've made with social media. So I really wrote this book. It doesn't matter what your relationship status is or if you've lost interest in dating entirely, that I guarantee you will learn something from it.
That's amazing. That was a perfect encapsulation of the book. Okay, let's deconstruct some of that because it's also interesting. Now, on the anxiety thing, what's the male-female difference there in rates of anxiety and depression that you mentioned?
So with Gen Z, it tends to be like it's extremely prevalent. So of Gen Zers, over half have a diagnosed mental health condition, and of them, 90% have anxiety. So historically, I would say mood disorders were more commonly seen in women. My sense is with the younger generation, it's probably evening out. I do think social media plays a large role in that, and women or girls tend to gravitate more towards visually based social media platforms, and also the interactions on those platforms. So it can be quite catty. There's a lot of social comparison. So I previously thought, like that body of research that shows that there are these really devastating mental health effects for young people, I really thought that was just more so the case in kids who have maybe a predisposition for these mental health issues, or maybe their parents are not as involved. But I'm beginning to think it's a developmental thing, and because these kids are getting on these platforms at such a young age, that it is really warping their perception of reality. But what I was interested to find is that also this is affecting young men too, and we see the trend of looks maxing, where young boys, and in some cases prepubescent boys, so they haven't even started puberty yet, are going on these forums to try and figure out which medical interventions and hormones they should be taking so that they can extend puberty, so that they can have a more masculine facial structure, or that they can be taller, because these are the things that women want. And so I think these young men are erroneously projecting, the men tend to value attractiveness and looks and youth more so in a partner than women do. Women care more about finances and resources, obviously. On average, not the case for every single person. But I do think these young men, because they're not as experienced romantically, because social media, the algorithm keeps feeding them this content that tells them, if you are a Giga Chad, if you are super, super masculine and really good looking, you're going to have no issues with women. And also it tells them women are hypergamous. So women are always going to be trading up, and they're never going to be happy with you. They're always going to cheat on you with someone better, with another alpha, a more alpha guy. So you need to be the most alpha looking guy. But women who are looking for a relationship actually find hypermasculinity a turnoff, because hypermasculinity tends to be associated with high testosterone, right? Like men who have very masculine facial features tend to have higher levels of testosterone, both developmentally and circulating currently. So it's associated with antisociality, aggression, cheating. So women who are looking for, say, a long-term relationship or a long-term partner are going to tend to stay away from men who look like that. So I'm just saying, basically, it's not going to give these young boys what they're looking for, but it's more so this idea that both boys and girls, I think, are being negatively affected by online content. And I'm really concerned about how this is going to shape them going forward, because they already have such negative views of the opposite sex and what they think the opposite sex wants. And they're now trying to, and girls too, they're trying to be both a combination of super skinny, but also curvy. So not too curvy, but then also not so curvy that they're not so skinny that they're not curvy. You know what I mean? It's just basically impossible to have that body type naturally. You have to undergo some form of cosmetic work. And then, in terms of facial work, like fillers and Botox, and I go into an extensive investigation as to how we got to this place where, in my hometown, I see young girls, I see teenagers walking around with a whole ton of work. And I'm just really concerned and amazed.
You mean cosmetic surgery work?
Yeah, mostly injectables.
Teenagers.
in the face. Yeah. But even
what do they need that for?
They don't need it. That's the thing. And so I only see this issue becoming even more pronounced with time, because as this generation gets older, it's not like I don't think this is something you dabble in. Once you start doing it, and I don't want to come down on people who have gotten work done. I don't think that's my place, but my concern is with children. I don't think children, especially young girls, they're undergoing these interventions that are designed for women in middle age. So there's no reason at 18 or even in your 20s to be doing anything like this. You should be doing other things and enjoying your life. So that's just one example of the ways that social media has really warped, I think, young people's self-esteem.
Yeah, and even older women, like in Hollywood, they get the work. I know, I guess the pressure's on to look young or whatever, but I remember being at TED conference, I think it was in Vancouver, and I was sitting next to a woman that looked a lot like Meg Ryan, who is just naturally gorgeous, just all-American beauty. And it was her. And, the lights come up and there's her name tag. I'm like, oh, my God, it's Meg Ryan. And she had all this work done. I thought, oh, my God. I mean, to me, as a guy, it's like, nah, that's just not it. I mean, maybe the pressure in Hollywood's different than the real world. I don't know. But I just thought most of the time this is not really good. That much work anyway. I mean, I know people do Botox. I can't really tell the difference, but I'm a dude. I'm not even paying attention to that kind of stuff. But okay, a couple threads there I think that are interesting. Again, there's a lot of different moving parts here. The extinction idea, underpopulation problem. I did have Dean Spears on the show. His book is called After the Spike. Population is going to spike out around 2050 at about 10 billion, and then it's going to go down, and it's going to keep going down. And he was pretty pessimistic about this. There's not much governments can do. If people don't want to have babies, they're not going to have babies. I think what you're talking about is a slightly different problem, maybe an underlying problem. Why aren't people having more babies? So one, I think, positive thing is if you give women economic empowerment and education and access to birth control, they choose to have fewer babies. So I guess the question for you would be, why are they having instead of having 6, they have 2? Why are they having 1 or less on average?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question. And I want to be clear, I don't think everyone should have kids. I don't think everyone has to have children. If people are happy without children, that's their right. My concern is more for the people who want to have children who are not having them, and why are they not having them? And there's one study by Pew that showed that of people who are childless, a quarter of them say they're childless because they couldn't find the right person. And so that's another piece of it, is that many women in particular, I think both men and women, want to have children. Although it's interesting that the polls seem to be showing that more young men than women want to be parents. So I think that's also influenced by cultural factors. But with regard to why people are not able to find the right partner, a big part of it is because of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that are actively penalizing men, and especially white and Asian men. So what you find, women are excelling academically and in the workforce, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I want to be very clear, because by criticizing DEI, I'm not saying the only reason women got ahead or women are successful is because they were given this unfair boost. And I think it's, again, amazing that women are ambitious. I think women should have the freedom to choose whether they want to prioritize family or their career, or if they want to do both. But the issue is, if you penalize men and hold them back in terms of what they're allowed to achieve in terms of their success, there are going to be fewer of them who are successful. So of the ones who are successful, they will have their pick of the lot in terms of female partners, and they will be disincentivized from settling down, or even, I would say, being willing to give anything in a relationship, because if they don't get exactly what they want, they can just find someone else who will give them what they want. So those men are having tons of sex, but the vast majority of men who are not as successful, who are falling behind in society, are basically shut out of the dating market. And so these are the men who are turning toward these alternatives like AI girlfriends, pornography, OnlyFans, platforms like that. And then once sex robots become, I think, cheap enough that you can just purchase them. Like right now, they're still quite expensive. I did a whole chapter on exploring that technology and really where that's headed. So what you find also is, for women who are very successful and well-educated, they can't find a partner who is at the same level of success as they are, or who is more successful than they are, because, as I mentioned, women are hypergamous and prefer to marry up. So what you find is, successful women will say, okay, well, I can't find the right person, I'll just keep focusing on my career. They become more successful, and then it becomes doubly difficult for them to find someone. And instead of saying, okay, this is a problem we are experiencing right now in society, and we need to find a way to address this, to fix the problem, society is giving these women alternatives like single motherhood by choice. So if you get to a certain age and you want a child, and you can't find a man with whom you'd like to have a child with, or with whom you'd like to have a child, then they have the choice of going off on their own and say, you know, I did an investigation in terms of what is it like when you buy sperm off the internet. Is this actually possible? And yes, it is possible. So I think that's, you know, I feel for women who are in that situation, because I can't imagine how difficult of a choice that would be. And I can only imagine how difficult it would be to be a child's primary caregiver, go through the process of not just pregnancy, but childbirth and childbearing on your own, while also being the sole provider. So my concern is, you know, this is not the way we should be looking at it. If women can't find someone that they want to pair up with, the solution is not to say, here's a way that you can just go off on your own and have a child on your own. And then culturally, we see also this idea that having a boyfriend now is cringy, being in a relationship is embarrassing, that type of thing. And men also saying, okay, well, or I would say people at the forefront of this technology saying, let's just give men these alternatives so that they have a sexual outlet, so they aren't overly frustrated and they're not going to go and start destroying things and burning down society, which is, I also don't think is the solution. The solution is to give them support and to acknowledge it's not fair to penalize people based on their biological sex.
Yeah, I had Richard Reeves on the show talking about his book of Boys and Men. That's another one of your moving parts there that you just kind of reviewed. You know, why the modern male is struggling. Well, in part, you know, that whole DEI thing of, you know, you're to blame. You discuss this in your book. You're to blame for, you know, Western capitalism and colonialism and all that stuff. And, you know, this, if you hear this enough, maybe growing up, you really begin to have a lot of self-doubts. You know, as well, you talk about the kind of feminization of academia and corporate America. Like in academia, where I work a lot, and publishing too, you know, there's more women than men all over the place. Okay, good. You know, they have the opportunity to do it, fine. But a lot of the equity feminists want it, every department must have 50-50 at least, or at least 50% women. And as we know, a lot of the STEM fields don't have this, engineering, physics, and so on. And I can assure you, it isn't because the departments don't want to hire more women. They do. They're desperate to hire more women, right? They're not being excluded. They're not discriminatory. They're not misogynist. That's not the issue. Women appear to be less interested in STEM fields. Why is that not okay? And in the other direction, why are we not you know, insisting that men go into, you know, marine biology and clinical psychology and nursing and some of the other departments where women are like 70% graduating with graduate degrees in these fields? The whole thing seems kind of messed up.
Yeah, and I mean, I've heard from plenty of my male colleagues who are still in academia who tell me that many hiring positions that are being filled are explicitly for women and minorities, and they will explicitly tell people, if you are a white man, it's not worth applying because you're not going to get it. To me, you couldn't do that the other way around. You couldn't say this position is not for women and not for racial minorities, right? That would be discrimination, and you would be rightfully, held accountable for that. So my issue, I think, is that you would think also within academia, where this is where the brightest minds should flourish and where people should encourage pursuing science and knowledge based on merit and your capabilities as a scientist, as opposed to your identity markers. And it reminds me of this column I wrote defending James Damore back in 2017 when his Google memo went viral, and he was saying correctly that the reason there are fewer women in STEM is because, not that women are biologically less capable, he was not saying that, I'm not saying that, but just that on average, women tend to find other fields more interesting, and it's due to exposure to testosterone in the womb, which masculinizes the brain. So women who do tend to find scientific disciplines more interesting were likely exposed to higher levels of testosterone, as were most men, but not all men, of course. So it's just, I really don't like the direction we're going in. And I know some feminists out there are very upset at me and feel I'm a traitor for saying this, but I think, as women, we did not appreciate when we were discriminated against, when we were not treated as equals. And so it's not fair to say, well, now that it's benefiting us, it's like we should keep our mouths shut and just go along with it.
Okay, so to those feminists who say that those differences you just mentioned are due to testosterone in the womb, and they say, no, it's a social contagion thing, it's pink and blue, and it's how they're raised, and so on. What is your response to those responses?
Well, there are thousands of studies documenting the effects of prenatal testosterone, and I have a whole ton of them listed in my first book, The End of Gender. So what I usually find is that's where the conversation ends, and it just continues more in terms of name calling and calling me, all these unpleasant, that I'm misogynist or whatever, but it's fine. It's more that in today's day and age, it doesn't matter what the research says. I think I understand where these departments are coming from, because even within the sciences, it's been overtaken by this sentiment that women are an oppressed class. And I do think at one point we were oppressed. We legitimately were oppressed. But now there's this overcorrection that is really unhelpful. And now what you see in response to that is young men are really put off from pursuing higher education because they say it's woke, it's extremely feminist, it's going to discriminate against me. And I've seen it firsthand, in terms of some of my male colleagues and friends who tried to go to university and say, I can't stand this. I'm in class and the professor is openly telling me I'm a bad person just because I'm white and I'm a man. Mm-hmm. So understandably, how are you going to do 3 or 4 years of that? That's not an education. That's basically like a shaming ritual. And so I partially feel, I know you're still, in the academy, so I'm not going to be too hard on it, but I do think
not really. I'm sort of retired now, and I
needs to
don't
change.
actually miss it. I don't miss it a lot. It's changed so much. Just one little anecdote thing, because, also there's studies showing, I think, baby chimpanzees, there's male-female differences in the toys they prefer to play with. They're chimps. They weren't indoctrinated into pink and blue television commercials or whatever. But anecdotally, when my little guy, he's almost 10 now, but when he was, 3 or 4, and I'd take him to Target, and we'd go to the toy department. And, to get to the boys thing where all the toys he likes, we had to pass the girls aisle. So I would kind of nudge him down the girls aisle just for fun. And he's like, no, what are you doing? I'm like, come on, you want this. He's like, no. And he's like, Dad. It was really funny. He had no idea what I was doing, but it was pretty funny. It's so obvious from the earliest age with what they prefer to play with.
Yeah, and there's one study that I quoted in my first book where they gave boys dolls and girls trucks to try and encourage them to socialize them to be like the opposite sex. Yeah. And the girls are lining up the trucks and tucking them into bed and telling them bedtime stories, and the boys are whipping the dolls around by the hair and using them as basically play weapons. So
yeah. Yesterday I just watched the new Netflix documentary Manosphere. This is Louis Theroux's latest film. He's a filmmaker and he does quirky, weird subjects. So this time he kind of joined up with some of these manosphere guys. Who's I don't know. I forget the names of these guys, but they're pretty prominent on YouTube, and they're major influences. And they're manly men with all the testosterone and the hot cars and the gyms. They're gym rats, and then they have the girlfriend, and then they just openly say, I just sleep around as much as I can, and she's happy to put up with it because that's the way it should be. So he interviews some of the girlfriends. And you could tell they were not, they were not vibing this, but and then one of them is like kind of starting to talk about it, and she gets a text on her phone, and she's like, oh, I can't talk to you anymore. He's like, what? Yeah, the guy, he was in the other room listening and just shut her down. These are bad dudes. I mean, these are not men that you would, want your daughter to marry or your son to be like.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say too, is the response now to extreme feminism and these policies that openly discriminate and subjugate men is that young men are finding voices that speak to them and that claim to be looking out for them. I personally don't think that this type of content or these influencers necessarily care about young men. I think it's more about getting attention and building their own brand. But because young men, I can see why it's palatable for them, because who's advocating for them publicly? I mean, you have, I wouldn't say all progressives are like this, but the main message from left-leaning media, I say this as a journalist, is that men are terrible. If men are struggling in society, I say this in extension, men are basically told to go cry into a pillow silently. And like left-leaning media doesn't care. If there are these issues, men's mental health, men's higher suicide rate, the ways in which men are struggling in terms of having a job, their mental health, caring about those issues is seen as somehow anti-women or somehow putting down women or dismissing women's needs or dismissing concerns about sexism. So there's that piece of it. And so these young men are saying, well, I don't have any support on this side of the aisle. I'm going to go to the right. And then what you see is these male influencers take it to such a far extreme on the right. But because, I mean, there are reasonable voices on the right, definitely speaking of this. But for whatever reason, I think it's also social media and the algorithm that is feeding young boys this content because it is so extreme and because it does tend to get more attention. That's the case with anything on social media. So these young boys, maybe they don't necessarily have fathers in their lives also, so they don't have a healthy male role model and they don't know what how healthy men treat women, and that the defining characteristic of masculinity is not being promiscuous and treating women like, worse than the family pet, or speaking to them like they're subhuman, or that the only goal in life should be to make a ton of money so you can drive nice cars and be really fit and get a lot of sexual attention. I think in many cases it's like influencers who have their own issues and they're now trying to overcompensate for those self-esteem issues with their brand. And now an entire generation, Gen Z men and Gen Alpha boys, are internalizing this as, oh, this is what I need to be successful. So until we as a society adequately address their concerns, because the left-leaning media just seems to keep moving in the opposite direction, saying, see, these manosphere guys are all toxic. And I don't think that's the best ideology for young men to latch onto, but I think many of them are misguided and they don't know any better. And I mean, they're children. So I try to keep that in mind because, yeah, especially, at some of the shows I've done previous to yours, I look in the comments and it's all these manosphere guys very, very angry that women are daring to talk about this issue. Oh, yeah, I wasn't expecting that at all. And so I try to think, these are people who are probably in a lot of emotional pain right now. And so I can't take this personally. I try to be very fair. I try to be fair to both men and women. And writing Sextinction, I wanted to be very fair because I think both sexes have contributed to this issue of sexlessness and to why both sexes are so enraged at each other. But yeah.
Debra, you were beyond fair in your book. You could not be more fair. You have 24 caveats throughout the whole thing. It's enough. Okay. On average, yes, of course. Yeah. Although I guess you do have to say that given the replication crisis and all the crazy one that's in social science. But one more point on the Manosphere film. The Free Press had a nice review of it in which they pointed out that we already know what these guys, like Andrew Tate is one of them and his brother. There's a bunch of them like that. We already know what they're up to. They've told us umpteen times right there on the air. They say why they're doing it. We're doing it to get clicks so I can make more money off my YouTube channel, so I can buy a nice car, so I can get laid more. I mean, they say that openly, right? And the critique was, why didn't he interview the young men, the 14-year-olds that are looking up to these guys, and say, what is it you like about this guy? Why are you doing this? What's the problem? That's what your book is addressing. The underlying problem is not those guys. It's the people that are giving them money or giving them clicks.
Right, because I do think it speaks to something important, an important factor, which is why is it young boys feel so lost that they are gravitating toward these voices? And then understandably, why young women say, I don't want anything to do with men in my generation or boys in my generation because this is how they think. I mean, if you don't have someone pushing back, what you see now is because, say these influencers are like a father figure to these boys, they're very much attached to them. And so anyone who criticizes them, it doesn't matter how reasonable they are, they see that as a personal threat. And so they will defend these influencers. So when you are in, say, in a dating context as you get older, and the women you're meeting are saying, hey, I don't like that you listen to this person. He doesn't say very nice things about women. These men are so I think, deeply ingrained in this ideology and to listening to these voices that they will choose those voices and those role models with whom they have this parasocial relationship, as opposed to taking the feedback from the women that they're dating. They probably think this is all feminism's fault and this is why women don't like me thinking like this, so I'm not going to date women, and the problem is all women. Just like you see happening with extreme feminism telling women that all men are predators and horrible people. And so young women who listen to this will say, well, I don't want to date men because men are just going to hurt me and be awful to me. And so it's two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about what women want in a man. You jokingly talk about the 6'6" rule of 6 feet tall, 6-figure income, 6 inches of manhood. Okay, but and if you add all those up, I think I posted on X about that, and somebody sent me a calculation. It's like less than 1%, right? So you got 30% of the women on these social media thing are super hot, looking for that. They're looking for less than 1%. So somebody's not going to be very successful on these sites.
It's funny because I saw one of the other comments, because you listed it as the 666 rule. I call it the 3 sixes rule, but people are saying how it's demonic also.
Oh, it's demonic, yes. That's funny.
But so basically the 3 sixes refer to a man who is over 6 feet tall, makes over 6 figures in annual income, and has a penis that is over 6 inches long. So basically the idea is, if you are dating a man who does not meet all 3 of these criteria, you're wasting your time. This is what the message is to women. And like you said, the number of men in America who meet all 3 of these sixes in terms of this criteria is, when I did the calculation, it was maybe 1%. And then when you factor in personality, being straight, unmarried, and then chemistry and all these other factors that would be important when it comes to dating and relationships or marriage, that whittles it down to an even smaller percentage. Mm-hmm. So basically women who subscribe to this ideology are shutting out potential men with whom they may have a future for this ideal that may or may not exist. And then so not only does this man need to exist, but you need to also meet him. And in today's climate where people are scared to talk to each other in real life, men are scared to approach women post Me Too, women are afraid that all men are potentially going to be predators, or that they're not going to meet these criteria, so they don't bother talking to guys anyway. It's really difficult. And I'm saying the factors that actually predict a happy marriage or long-lasting relationship are things like agreeableness, like personality traits, like being healthy, having healthy attachment, right? Secure attachment, compromise, being considerate. And yes, evolutionarily speaking, it makes sense why women prefer men who are taller, right? Men who can provide. And then the 6-inch penis criterion is actually not very accurate, because I don't know how graphic I can be on your podcast, but you can
go
bleep
ahead.
Me out.
Put it out there.
So penile girth is actually a greater predictor of sexual satisfaction than penile length. So that it's not necessary. You don't necessarily need to have a 6-inch penis. The average length is 5 inches. So I think most men are just fine as is. But I think women should be allowed to want what they want, but just have some, perhaps some awareness that not all of these metrics are the most important. And just like, I think men get a lot of flack for having the preferences they do in terms of physical appearance. So if it's fair for women to have these preferences for a man, then it's fair for men to have these preferences for a woman. And the other thing is that if you as a woman have these standards, then you're going to really be fighting it out with most women for these higher status men. And if you do not, you're going to be required to have sex sooner in order to stand a chance, because that's what it comes down to. If men are dictating the terms of a relationship, or if there are fewer viable men than women, men are going to be the ones saying, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I expect. And if you don't give that to me, like I said before, they're going to go elsewhere. Or in the case of what we see with those influencers, those manosphere influencers, they will have multiple women, and those women have no choice but to share him. But I don't know what their arrangements are, but I've heard of some men who will say, I will sleep with whomever I want. You are not allowed to sleep with anybody else.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole polyamory thing is, to me, it's a failed experiment from the beginning. Yes, I know maybe it works for some people, but on average, right? I met a guy who said he was polyamory. He forgot to tell his wife. You just told the girlfriends.
Oh my
like,
God,
okay.
that's cheating. That's not polyamory.
No, I see how this works. Okay. We used to call this, swinging or something anyway.
Yeah.
I think, so, but isn't there research on like education and intelligence can counter some of the height issues or whatever, the more physical differences?
Yeah, I would say historically, and in terms of real life relationships, yes. And I think personality and just even how you vibe with somebody can make such a difference, right? Like in person, how they treat you, kindness. But social media has created such a bizarre perception of what the opposite sex is like and what you should also look for. And that's what I find the most disturbing is that, I mean, it sounds crazy. It sounds like lore, right? It sounds like nonsense when you hear this thing. But there are people online. I don't know how much is them trying to virtue signal or, try to beat intersexual competition by saying, as a woman, I will only date men who meet these criteria so that other women think that she's high status because she has these standards. And so if they need to be high status or if they consider themselves high status, they should also follow these same standards. I don't know how much of it is that this is what people genuinely believe, but my sense is there is a trend toward this because I hear from men who say, I mean, even when they are meeting women, they feel the need to say, if they're not 6 feet, they'll say, I'm almost 6 feet tall. I've noticed this as a trend among men. They'll say, I'm almost 6 feet tall if you ask them how tall they are. And I don't, just to be clear, I don't ask men that just for fun. I ask them in the context of, I'm writing this book about, this issue. What do you find? I'm curious to know what you found. So they'll tell me in terms of when they meet women, they'll usually say that they're almost 6 feet tall. Whereas men who are actually 6 feet tall or taller will just say how tall they are. They'll say I'm 6'1", I'm 6'2". So even that in itself it's crazy. And I don't think that's so important, right? And
don't
the
people
fact
do that on their height and weight and
weight
and
dating,
income?
Dating profiles, everyone lies about that stuff. I shouldn't say everyone lies about it, but that's how ridiculous it is. If you are on, I say everyone get off dating apps, honestly. I don't believe that's the best way to meet partners. But many women will set the height filter at 6 feet. So you are cutting out so many men with whom you might potentially be compatible. And then the other thing is many men lie about their height. So the ones who are meeting that 6 feet criteria are liars. So you're now, in some ways filtering for liars.
Yeah, well, I remember that old study. It's a few years old now. That for each college degree you have as a guy, that's worth 2 inches in height. So I figured, well, I got a bachelor's, master's, and PhD, so I'm finally over 6 feet. Yay, I made it.
But my advice to young men, and it might sound crass, is really just be very, very successful. Pick what it is that you really love and you're good at. Get very successful. You have time. Time is not as unforgiving on your biological window as for women, fortunately or unfortunately, but you have time. And you will not have an issue attracting women if you are financially successful. All of this focus on height and looks maxing and even having the best body and all, like women don't care as much about that. Yes, it could get you more attention, but at the end of the day, that's not what's going to keep a woman around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watching another new Netflix documentary on the Murdoch family and Rupert Murdoch. I think he's on his 5th wife now. And it's like every 10 years older he gets, the next wife is 10 years younger than the previous wife. So it's like a diverging curve. It's so obvious. He's not a good-looking guy at all. He's kind of short. But it's obvious why, right? It's billions of dollars. I don't know. It's crazy.
Right. No, there's some truth to what you're saying in terms of like trends and also what we see in sex differences. So men tend to prioritize youth, fertility, attractiveness in their partners. And again, this is not to say everyone does this. And I do understand why some, say, extreme feminists have an issue with this or talking about this, because then they see it as society placing too much emphasis on women's appearance. And why is it men do not have the same type of scrutiny? Although I would say nowadays it's pretty harsh for men too, because you see many men, older men, getting cosmetic work done when they really don't need to. Like, if anything, I think wrinkles work in a man's favor because it shows he's older, and with age comes more resources. But I understand that concern because women will say, look at young women and teenage girls and their obsession with having the perfect body, and they're going through all these really invasive procedures to try and look more beautiful. But I don't think we have to deny what each sex wants on average or what we're attracted to say, no, young women, that should not be the only thing women care about. Obviously, like, women too should care about being intelligent, being interesting, have a sense of humor, be well-rounded. Like, both men and women should care about their personality in addition to how much money they're making and what they look like.
Okay, then what does the data say about what men prefer in women? That hourglass figure, what is it, a 0.7 hip, waist to hip ratio, stuff like that, symmetrical faces, smooth complexion, But that's just physical. What are the psychological or other characteristics men want?
I'm thinking now in terms of the research. My sense in terms of the men I've asked and for research for sextinction was very much someone who is supportive and who appreciates them for being men. This is, I think, a newer concept that because men today feel so like they're constantly being belittled for being men. And if you as a woman can just appreciate masculinity and appreciate masculinity in your man, that already I think does wonders. I probably don't need to tell conservative leaning people this, but definitely I'd say because there's a segment of society and they tend to be the loudest who really demonize men and demonize masculine men, even though I do think most women prefer masculinity in their male partners, or young women feel that they have to compete with men. They have to, be more successful than they are, make more money than they do. And if they do, that's great. But I don't think it should be about trying to stomp all over your partner and show them how much better you are than they are. That's not a healthy dynamic for a relationship. So I say this is a more recent change societally because historically, this is the first time really women have been outperforming men at the rate that they are. In a few years, 2 women are going to be graduating from university for every man. So this problem is only going to get worse.
2 to 1 now. Oh,
yeah.
It's going to be there. Wow.
Yeah, and I hear from parents
That's
all the
huge.
time that their daughters are succeeding academically, they're getting great jobs, but they can't seem to find boyfriends, and then their sons are not doing as well. They tend to be, on the computer all day long, vaping, no motivation, whatever. And it's really unfortunate because I do think this I see it both in the data and I see it and I hear it anecdotally from people who reach out to me and tell me what they've experienced and how they feel like sextinction really has captured something that's going on. So in terms of the research, yeah, I think what women and men typically look for in relationships is someone who's supportive, someone who is more agreeable, someone who is securely attached, as I said. And what's interesting is that in terms of marital satisfaction, men place more emphasis on feeling attracted to their partner in terms of their marital satisfaction than women do. So women who are attracted to their husband, that has no bearing on how satisfied they are in the marriage. So that tells you something as well.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I've been married 12 years now, and I was married before that 22 years. So I have some experience in this matter. It does help to have somebody you're physically attracted to, but that's only a surface. It really is only a surface thing. Just genuine niceness, easiness, emotional stability. It's just easy from day to day. The level of conflict is low. I remember I was just reading some research on behavior genetics, and that people that score high in low in agreeableness, high in disagreeableness, they have emotional regulation. They get mad a lot. That just makes life harder. It's like, chill out. I just want to live my life. You live your life. We're going to be happy. It's going to be easy. Just easy now. But somebody that kind of gets fired up every day, that's hard. I'm not sure what that's called. Emotional regulation, I guess, maybe, or agreeableness on the big 5.
Yeah, so I see in terms of my predictions for relationships going forward, I see that emotional regulation aspect being increasingly a problem because younger kids, especially Gen Alpha, who spend a lot of time on screens, they're called iPad kids, or they're called iPad kids because they're on their devices from such a young age.
Yeah.
And I think, understandably, parents thought this was educational. My understanding is that, yes, it can be, but you have to be very, very careful in terms of what they're consuming and how much time they're spending on it. But there are studies coming out now showing that increased screen time is associated with cortical thinning in children. And so their brain is not developing properly. And so this is going to lead to issues in terms of being able to inhibit their emotions, deal with frustration in a socially acceptable way, to be able to even have, I would say, interactions with people when they are feeling frustrated or tired, or if they are angry, and not resort to, say, lashing out at people or physical aggression, things like that, especially their kids. So they're still developing. But like you said, in the context of a relationship, what's it going to be like now if you are in a very close relationship with someone else, and this requires these skills every single day in a very intimate way? I just think it's going to be so much more of a mess. I do think also some people like that high conflict intensity because they see that as exciting, but that usually is indicative of someone who experienced a lot of chaos early in life. And so I would say, because I hear from very many people say, but in the beginning, someone is so exciting, it's so much fun, and then it turns out, oh, this is not what you wanted long term. So that's the thing. Usually partners who are super boring on the first date, from what I've heard, they end up being wonderful and wonderful spouses.
That's really funny. Yeah. Well, so during the Me Too movement, there was that a bill passed about, what is it called, affirming consent for college kids were having a lot of sex. So, did she say yes at every stage, and so on and so forth. And in the state of California, they said, yeah, it has to be like a consent confirmed at each stage. It's like, well, how are you going to regulate that? I mean, short of you filming your sex, which I don't recommend because of this other problem of revenge porn. And, it's not good to have that on record, probably.
No.
And then I remembered there was a very prescient short documentary film, Jason Reitman, Reitman, the filmmaker. It's a short film, it's like 4 minutes long, called Consent. I don't know if you ever saw this or if I told you about it, but it was 2004, so way ahead of this. Where so it opens with a college kid, co-eds kind of smooching on the bed, and then he says, well, I think maybe I should get that thing, and she's like, yeah, that's a good idea. And you think he's going to reach for a condom, and he pulls out a contract, and he goes, have you seen these before? She goes, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I signed them, yeah. So then she goes, of course I have mine, and he goes, oh yeah, of course. And then, do you mind if I get my attorney? No. And then the attorney stands up, and her attorney stands up, and the two attorneys go back and forth. Now my client would like to touch your client's breast, well my client would like, and they go, yeah, okay, they tick the box, okay, and then it's all affirmed, and we're all good. And then the lawyers leave, and then they're about to get into it, and then the door opens, and the female's roommate walks in, and she's this tall, good-looking woman. And she says, "Oh, should I get my attorney?" It's very funny, but again, it's a serious issue. I mean, in my generation, I mean, you don't have to act. You can tell if somebody, nonverbal communication, you can tell if somebody's into it or not, or if she doesn't want to go any further. It's obvious, right? And maybe now, because some men are scum and they just ignore the obvious nonverbal cues, now there has to be a rule that says all men must. And so maybe some of these young men are like, oh, forget it, I'm not even going to bother, I don't want to go through all this stuff, I'll just watch porn.
Yeah, I do think that's part of the appeal of the AI girlfriends. And then also why pornography is, well, one, pornography is influencing how young people are behaving in the bedroom. And I also think it has become a replacement for very many young men who simply say, this is so much easier than having to actually go out and approach women, which is understandably terrifying for them. Both because, I mean, that in itself is a terrifying prospect, right? To be rejected to your face if you approach someone you're interested in. But then also there's this chance that he might have his life ruined if he asks the wrong woman and she gets very offended, or if she, say, films him or her friend films him and they put it on social media after. So I have a chapter in Sextinction that is about pornography and the ways that I think it's influencing the sex recession, and that especially for Gen Z, so they grew up with exposure to porn at a very young age due to getting access to a smartphone quite young. And again, I think parents had really good intentions by giving children their smartphones because it's a way of keeping in touch with them, keeping them safe. But unfortunately, with that comes easy access to porn. And in many cases, most children don't know what it is when they first see it. So the average age nowadays that a child is exposed to porn is 12. And 1 in 7 kids sees porn by the age of 10 or younger. And I would expect that those numbers are going to be even higher now because, I mean, it's only getting more easy for kids to get access to that. And I also think more kids are getting smartphones at younger ages. This just continues to be the trend. I think there is more awareness about the detrimental effects of screens and smartphones and social media on children, but I'm not sure that there's enough awareness about how easy porn is accessed by kids, because in many cases, it's either their classmates sending it to them, it is predators on the internet who are on social media, even if they're playing a video game or they're on an app that has nothing to do with sexuality, there are ads for these websites. And in some cases, these are ads targeting children. So that's what I found the most upsetting when I was doing research for that chapter, is just, I feel that this is, I mean, it's a very lucrative thing, right? If you are showing kids this content at a young age and they get hooked on it, well, they're going to be watching it throughout their lives. And what I do think is, for many kids, especially in Gen Z, with the anxiety that has come along with, say, excessive screen time, having to grow up in a time of COVID, post-COVID, where isolation has become the norm in some ways, and also interacting with the opposite sex has become so tenuous. Well, you can get sexual gratification or some form of it through a screen with this, watching this person, but it's not the same as real life sex, but it will help to satisfy someone enough so that they feel less of a need to actually go out and find a real life partner. So people might say, well, pornography's existed since, for decades or whatever. I mean, I myself, as you know, Michael, I used to write for a very well-known men's magazine that featured nude women.
Playboy. Of course. I used to get the magazine just to read your column, and that's all I looked at.
Of course. So, I think pre-internet, that I would say high-speed internet porn nowadays, especially kids consuming it, is very, very worrisome, because what they are consuming is not just, loving, caressing, intimacy. It's in many cases degrading, very violent, very fetishistic, and it's not anything that a child should ever be exposed to, ever. Mm-hmm. And so, we see how, say, trends in sexual behavior are changing as a result of this exposure. There's been research to show that one sexual act, it's called sexual choking, also known as sexual strangulation, which is exactly what it sounds like. This has become very, very popular among Gen Z, and particularly among Gen Z women. And I don't believe that Gen Z women actually enjoy this. I think they've learned this from porn, because millennial women, if they went home with a man and he tried to choke them during sex, or he slapped them, spit on them, did other violent, abusive, degrading behavior, these women would be horrified, and they would say, where did he get the idea that this was acceptable? I didn't like that. But now what you see with Gen Z women is they are actually asking their male partners to do this. So in Sextinction, I go into all the reasons why someone might potentially actually like being choked, which is sexual masochism, which is something very different. I don't believe that's the case for most Gen Z women. And do I think that most Gen Z men are sexually sadistic, or are they just doing what they see in porn because they think women like it? I think it's more likely it depends on the age. I think younger guys could be doing it because they actually like it, because this is the thing they've been trained on in terms of their sexuality. But I think most men who grew up at a time when, if they had their first sexual experience before watching this really violent pornography, my sense is they're probably doing it because they think women like it. Or maybe they had a partner who said that she liked it, but did she really like it? So then there's this other thing of, if both men and women were just honest about what they really want during sex, we would prevent all of this. Because choking can be fatal. It can lead to loss of consciousness, which can lead to brain damage. It can lead to permanent mental health issues down the line, like dissociation, depression, anxiety. And it's showing that it can also lead to cortical swelling. So there's inflammation in the brain after being choked. And just so your audience has an idea of how prominent this is, of university students, of women, half have experienced this. A quarter of them have experienced this by the age of 14. A third of them have experienced this more than 5 times. So it's very, very common. And I have yet to speak to anyone of that generation who hasn't either had a partner ask to choke them or asked them to choke them. So
you suspect this is mostly like pluralistic ignorance, where both sides think the other side wants this, so I'm going to say I want this. But privately, they would not probably say that.
Right. And I do think for people who genuinely enjoy choking their partner or wanting to be choked during sex, it probably has to do with, I've document research in the book, including research I did myself when I was still in academia, showing that tends to be associated with childhood trauma and physical abuse in childhood. Right. So that's a bit different. And I bring that up just to say, I hope that people who have this experience can get help, and heal. But I find that that's one area that, especially within sex research, people get very upset at me for pointing that out, because they feel I'm pathologizing BDSM or I'm pathologizing sexual kinks. But I'm saying if your sexual preferences are the result of something pathological, I think it makes more sense to look at the root cause. And if it's some pain that you have experienced that you've eroticized, to treat that. If it's the same if you had a physical ailment, wouldn't you want to treat the underlying ailment, as opposed to saying these symptoms are totally fine and I love them and I take pride in them and they're my identity?
Remember that movie Along Comes Polly, Ben Stiller, in which he has a love interest with, who's the famous actress anyway? Sorry, I forgot. But his buddy says, okay, on their first date, if you're making out with her or whatever, slap her on the ass. Women love to be slapped on the ass. So they're on the bed smooching, and he slaps her on the ass, and she says, "Did you just slap my ass?" And he goes, No, I have a spasm in my hand because he realizes, oh, my buddy was wrong.
Yeah, and
So I think it's misinformation is the problem.
yeah, and that's the thing. But especially for, say, younger people who may not be as experienced or may not be as assertive, the woman in that case might feel that, especially if she watches a lot of porn herself, she might feel that this is what she's supposed to like. So she might not say, "Hey, you slapped me. I don't like that." She might say, "Oh, I'm supposed to like this, right? So I'm going to pretend that I like it." So he comes away thinking, "My buddy was right, or the porn I'm watching is right. That women do like this."
Yeah. Well, there was that case, lawsuit a few years ago with the Los Angeles Dodgers pitcher. I always forget his name. Anyway, he was sued by his girlfriend who said he choked her. And in his defense at the lawsuit, he showed all these texts where she was saying, "I like when you choke me." And it really came down to, yeah, but not that much. You went too far, right? I mean, then it became really dangerous to let the beast out. I mean, there are some guys that are just assholes, and this guy, he's a professional athlete. He's like twice her size, and you start messing around with something like that. That's pretty risky.
Yeah, I have to emphasize, there's no safe way to do this. I mean, some people say, "Oh, you do it in a certain way. You make sure you check in." No, there's no safe way to do this. And especially if you are a man and you're choking your partner, you're going to be likely physically stronger. And I find in general, men tend to sometimes not be as aware of their physical strength when it comes to even being affectionate. I think every woman can relate to the feeling of, if, say, she has a platonic male friend who gives her a hug and he accidentally squeezes the life out of her, and you have to, tell them like, no, that's too much, and they don't mean anything by it. But if you're in a situation where, say, people are, turned on and they're in the dark, or they've been drinking and doing drugs, you're not as aware. And especially if your partner is saying to you that she likes this. I mean, I sympathize with men in some ways about this, but at the same time, I don't know about that case, so I don't want to speak to that. But I would say, I see both sides. I think women need to be able to be assertive and just say what you want. Don't pretend. Don't feel like you have to comply with what pornography is telling you to do. I mean, people listening, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to reach Gen Z women, but, if you are the parent of such a child, it's very difficult to talk to kids about sex. I understand it's super uncomfortable, but just to let them know that, you are allowed to have boundaries. And the same with men. If you have a partner who wants you to do this to them, that's a hard no, because you can get into a lot of trouble legally if something goes wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so I gather you support the idea of like no social media till you're 16, no smartphones in high schools, and all those kind of new parental and hopefully corporate restrictions on this. But what about adults? If an adult wants to watch porn, it's none of my business. Why should I tell them that? But then again, it's a matter of degree. Like, do I have a drinking problem? Well, I don't know. If your spouse left you and you lost your job, you probably have a drinking problem, right? So, I mean, if you watch porn and your sex life with your spouse is great, okay, then you don't have a problem. But if you're watching porn and you never have sex with your spouse, you probably have a problem.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual person. Like you said, I don't feel it's my place to go knocking on people's bedroom doors and saying like, "What are you doing in there?" I don't agree.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't with the book. I was very careful also to say, this is just neutral information, unbiased information. I'm giving people to hopefully help them make better choices in their lives and to avoid the pitfalls that are coming our way very quickly if they're not here already, in terms of these technologies and the social changes that are on their way. I would say it's usually, like, when I was in research, I would work with men who had problems with pornography, and it usually is an issue with anxiety and procrastination or poor coping skills. It's a way for them to numb themselves. If you look at the research around pornography use, it tends to be more common in people who are depressed, who experience boredom, who experience meaninglessness in life, and again, poor coping skills, anxiety. So, not to say that everyone who watches porn has these problems, or that every adult, I should clarify, every adult who watches porn will have problems with it. But I do think it's just worth questioning. And I can understand probably many men listening to this might be horrified to say, like, how can you, this is such a socially acceptable thing. But I feel my job as a journalist is just to be as honest as I can be, even if it makes me very unpopular with people, and to say it's worth questioning because, I do think, like you said, if it's affecting your relationships or your marriages or your marriage, hopefully you're only married to one person, or if you are having less sex because you would rather watch porn, why is that? Maybe it's worth asking, why is that? And if your spouse or partner is saying to you that they feel neglected because of your pornography use, maybe it's worth having a conversation about that. Because for people, say, who are very anxious, or maybe they lack communication skills, they will turn to porn as a way to distract themselves and avoid doing the thing or having the conversation that they don't want to have. And so that does, kick things down the road a little bit, but at the end of the day, that problem is always going to be there until you actually address it.
It's interesting that that's become a conservative or religious Christian conservative position, when in fact that used to be pretty common across the board. Like, you should not, have promiscuous sex. When I was a Christian I was at Pepperdine University, first graduating class from the Malibu campus. And we were not allowed in the girls' dorms, and vice versa. You could meet in the little anteroom downstairs where the TV was and everybody was hanging out. That was fine, but you can't go. And, I didn't like it at the time, and I had a girlfriend, so we did our thing somewhere else. But, but in fact, that's kind of good, right? I mean, because otherwise, there'd be rampant other stuff going on, and, maybe that's some of those restrictions have been learned the hard way over thousands of years. Like, we know what men are like, we know what women are like. We need these rules. They need boundaries.
Well, what you could do nowadays is just identify as a woman, and they'd be like, sure thing,
yes.
Go for it, knock yourself out.
Yeah,
in fact, we'll pay for your lodging to the women's. Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well,
I think part of it is the idea, like, I'm critical of sex positivity in the book, and I say that, I'm someone who was previously very, quote, sex positive, and I see that I don't think it's necessarily good for society to just say whatever people want to do sexually, they should be supported in doing, which is seen as, I suppose, a right-leaning view. I don't think it should be. I mean, that's commonsensical. Like, I don't think it's good for people to be led by their most base instincts, and especially when it comes to having intercourse. I mean, that's a very private activity, and I don't want to get too graphic in terms of how I describe it, but you know what I'm getting at. Like, it's not something you should be doing with every single person, especially not strangers. I don't think that's not good for a person. So I can understand why rules like that exist, and I think a little bit more maybe critical thinking is beneficial. So in that ways, I want to give Gen Z, those who maybe are abstaining from sex, because my sense is they saw with millennials that millennials were very hypersexual, were very much promoting casual sex and friends with benefits and things like that. And so my sense is some of Gen Z is saying we don't want to be like that, the last generation, so we're abstaining from sex. But then those who are having sex tend to do it in the context of situationships, so they're not very well defined. Basically like a situation plus relationship, like a portmanteau of those two words, and saying they don't, it's not a relationship, it's not defined as boyfriend and girlfriend, but they're still sleeping together, they still spend tons of time together. They just don't want to put a label on it because of, say, the popularity of polyamory, this idea that everyone should just love and have sex with everyone else. And I think there has to be a healthy balance of saying, yes, we have boundaries and we have standards, and we're going to get to know someone before we engage in that with them. But I don't think there needs to be any shame around sex, or that it fits in a healthy context. My problem with sex positivity is it seems to promote sex in just any context at all, and I don't think that's good for people. That's why we are where we are now.
I think you're right. Yeah. You talk about that study showing when a man orgasms inside of a woman, his sperm is absorbed by her vaginal walls, and she gets some of his testosterone and so forth. I forget what the details were, but it has an effect on her body. Right, so this comes up in this Manosphere film, the Louis Theroux's film, where one of these bro guys is like, she can't have a bunch of men coming inside of her, because then if we have babies, the babies are going to be like those other men. And he's like, absolutely nobody thinks that, dude. It's haven't you heard of DNA? I mean, it's like these guys, they must have heard that study or something and then conflated this with that's what changes babies, or I don't know what. It was crazy.
I wonder if what they're thinking of is the idea that the penis was shaped in a very specific way to scoop out other men's semen, so that if a woman has sex with multiple men in the same, a close period of proximity of time, so if say you're guy number 2, I don't advocate for this, just to be clear,
yes.
But say you're guy number 2, and the design of your anatomy is to facilitate you having a better chance of impregnating her and lowering the chance of your sexual rival of impregnating her. And then I guess if it's, guy number 3, it's so on. It goes down the line. That's the idea.
Well, there was that book, the sperm competition, where there's different kinds of sperm. There's the warrior sperms that fight off the other sperms, and then the sperm that's going to get in there and impregnate the egg. Yeah. Anyway, so there is something to that. Yeah, it's funny how these people get these studies and then conflate them with other things. What about okay? So prostitution, OnlyFans, all these ways to make money for women. We've had this debate on this show a lot. I had Ayala on here, who was the highest earner on OnlyFans for a while, but even she admits this is not good for most women. I can do this. I can have zipless fucking all I want. I can have sex like a man. But most women can't, so don't do it. Okay. But she also points out that there's a huge Pareto distribution or power law here, where not 80-20, or it's probably not even 90-10. It's probably like 99% of the money is made by 1% of the women, something like that. So most of the women putting themselves through this, they're not even financially successful doing it, much less the emotional consequences.
Right. I mean, the average earner on sites like OnlyFans is roughly $100 a month. So it's a ridiculously low amount of money, and you're basically throwing away your future. I shouldn't say it like that, but honestly, once it's on the internet, it's going to be there forever. And you're going to, even if you get very lucky and say nobody takes your content and puts it on a different site and another site after that, or say, people who do know that this is what you did, maybe you move in, you change your name, you will always know that you did that. And I think most people, it will eat away at them over time. And I do think the underlying reason why women go into this line of work has to do more with unfortunate experiences they had in terms of sexual abuse as a child. There's studies showing this. And also maybe the ways they view men, or the way they view their own bodies, or their own exposure to porn at a young age. I don't think it's a decision that comes from being healthy emotionally and happy and financially successful. Although there are some women you see, they come from well-to-do families and they choose to do this line of work. But again, I do think there are probably other reasons psychologically why they choose to do it. So my hope is that, young women think critically before they make that decision. I'm generally not a fan of banning things, just because I don't think banning things works. But I just hope that young women really think critically about it, because some of them are going on these websites as teenagers, again, where their brains are not fully developed, and maybe they bought into this idea that making a ton of money is the only thing that matters, and it doesn't matter how you make that money, which is a narrative that is really being pushed by progressives, and especially so-called sex positive people, that you as a woman, you're going to be sexualized by society. So instead of pushing back and saying, hey, I'm worth more than that, which is what I thought women's value was, instead women are being told, well, just make money off of it then, and if they hate men, they say, well, I'm just going to drain these men's bank accounts. I'm going to use my body to take what I can from men. And again, that's not the most healthy dynamic. And I'd also say for the men who are paying for this content, this is one strategy, if you can call it that, of men who say have been shut out from dating, in that they get a simulation, I guess, of sexual intimacy by buying these nudes and having interactions. Well, what they believe are interactions with the creator, but it's usually chatters. It depends on how big the creator is. Usually they have teams of men in other countries who are the ones answering their direct messages or sending the photos and videos to them. It's not actually the creator herself who's doing this. And so for these men, wouldn't you prefer to have a woman who actually loves you and cares about you and invest that time and money into her, as opposed to this? Again, it's a sexual outlet, which at the end of the day gives you an orgasm. And if that's all you want, I guess that works. But long term, I think it will eventually eat away at anyone's ability to attract a mate, because you will get used to this one-way transaction sexually, where you're paying for something. And the same thing with prostitution, I'd say. You're paying for something and you're getting the thing that you want, but that's not a real interaction. That's not a genuine interaction. And so when you do go out into the dating world, that's not what dating's like at all. There's a lot of give and take there. And your partner, if you're at dinner with someone, she's not going to just want to sit and listen to you talk about what you want to talk about. She is going to have her own needs, right, and desires, especially when it comes to in the bedroom. So I understand for men it's more difficult to get sexual access, and I can understand why this might be seen as the perfect replacement, because for men who say have had difficulties with dating, I say the same thing with or a similar thing with sex robots. I think it's in many cases men who are heartbroken and they're turning down this route because it allows them to have what feels like a close relationship with a female form, but it's not that at all. But I would question, like what is the real reason why you're turning away from human connection? And I think that's a more valuable question in terms of happiness long term.
Well, I guess in the case of prostitution, for some men who cannot otherwise get women, they just pay for it. Do they get some physical pleasure out of that? I mean, you could just masturbate or watch porn or whatever. So there's more touching involved. Maybe that makes a difference. But in the end of the day, if you're paying for it, then that's the only reason she's having sex with you. I mean, if you weren't paying her, she wouldn't have sex with you. You have to know that at some level. And it's like, even if you're spending a lot of money on a date, you go to some of these fancy restaurants, you spend hundreds of dollars and so on. But you don't know what's going to happen. She may say yes at the end she may say no, right? Or it may not work out. So there's always that doubt that makes it even more special when it does work out versus, well, this is 100% going to happen because we already agreed and I paid her, right? So it feels like there'd be a huge psychological difference there.
Yeah, and I mean, some people will say that, what was I about to say about this? With men who say the sex recession, is this because prostitution is more readily acceptable? People are just having sex with prostitutes as opposed to, say, organically with people that they would otherwise meet and not be paying. And so it's not that people are having less sex, it's that it's going towards prostitution, or say it's going toward masturbation. But we do see, first with the criticism about masturbation and how it's, those people aren't actually having less sex. We're seeing actually like a society-wide decline in masturbation as well, which is what makes me think it's hormonal on some level, because it's very unusual, especially among adolescents. So there's one study, I'm very particular about, how people do research with children, but this study was very immaculate in terms of being sure to get parental consent. And so they did find that even among adolescents, there's a decline in masturbation. And then also with regard to, say, prostitution, most of the men who actually engage in prostitution are not super wealthy. So my sense is the only way they're able to have women have sex with them is because they're paying them. And in some cases, these are married men. So I don't think that it is that men are having as much sex as they always were, but they're just paying for it instead now. That doesn't make sense. Why would men prefer to just pay for all sex? So like you said, I think there is a level of shame that comes with that. And if a man is able to attract a woman and not have to pay her for sex, that's going to be preferable to that transaction. It's also illegal in many places, right? So then he also gets potentially into trouble doing that. So just to clarify that for people who may be thinking, is it just that we're having the same amount of sex as before, it's just going into different avenues? I don't think that's the case.
Well, I had a former sugar baby on the podcast who wrote a book about this, about why it's not good for women. But she did it for a few years, then she got hired by the company. I forget the name of the company now. Seeking Arrangements. Then it became just Seeking, I think, anyway. And it turns out most of the guys on there are married. They're just there for sex. And most of the women, because it's illegal, the company doesn't warn them or give them rules or like, here's what's probably going to happen. If you don't get paid up front, he's probably just going to leave the hotel without paying you and so on. By the way, you don't start liking this guy, because if you start liking him, it's probably not going to be your boyfriend, right? And so she talks about all that. And they target these college-age women that have huge tuition bills. And they're look, you could work at McDonald's over there at the cafe there on campus for minimum wage, or you could do this and make thousands of bucks a week, on the sugar daddy site. So some of them choose that economically, but it says there's a price to pay for that.
Yeah, and I mean, there are influencers on social media that actually do this, where they will amass followers, giving them suggestions and tips on how to basically be a high-paid escort, which is sugar babying. Sugar babies tend to be, like you said, they're prostitutes, but they are more educated, and they tend to have longer-term arrangements with their benefactors. So this is something I think parents really need to be aware of, especially if you have daughters. I mean, sons too, because there are men who are doing this as well, but especially for young girls, because understandably, when you're young and you want to make money and you want nice things, if social media and your friends, especially if they're doing this, if they're selling their nudes and they're going on dates with older men for money, many young women think, okay, this is a perfectly legitimate way for me to do it. Or they think, because the lie on social media is that you can do this and you don't have to have sex with anyone. You go sit on a date, you look nice, and the man will give you money. And of course, I don't think there are many people, unless you're born yesterday, who honestly believe that's how it works. But if you're a child, you may not know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's illegal. She was telling me that they have a like a registry program where like I'm registered at Saks Fifth Avenue and this company and that company, and then you go on there and you buy me the bracelet or the hair extensions or the whatever I want, and then I'll meet you. So see, she can actually check to see if the purchase was made before she goes over. I mean, it's just insane, really. It's like,
Yeah.
what? It's like a business.
They'll pay for your plastic surgery too. I've heard of women getting like their Brazilian butt lifts and their breast
Oh my God.
augmentations. Yep.
Wow, incredible. Okay, now just one other couple points here, and I've kept you a while on the egg freezing thing. So Abigail Schreier, who I love, who I know you know, writes for Free Press now, this Ask Abigail question, right? So the person yesterday was a woman, 35 years old, dating a 31-year-old. And he doesn't want to get married yet. He keeps putting it off, and he wants her to freeze her eggs so they can decide years down the line. And what should I do? I really love him, and I'm later this year. I'm gonna get my eggs frozen. So you can imagine what she told this young woman, like, "Run, dump this guy," right? But I guess that's this free egg freezing, IVF, and all that. I mean, my son is born IVF because we're an older couple. Right. So it's a blessing for older couples that can't have kids otherwise that want kids. Okay, good. But, as you're talking about in your book, this can be abusive.
Yeah, I have to say I love Abigail. And with regard to that question, the person writing into her, this is my concern, is that young women are being sold this idea that egg freezing is going to buy them an unlimited amount of time. So that particular dynamic where the boyfriend does not want to commit or keeps kicking the can down the road and leading her on, and now she's going to undergo this very expensive and potentially invasive treatment to satisfy his whims that may or may not come into fruition, I would similarly say, no, you need to run. But my concern is that for young women especially, it's being sold as something that is 100% a sure thing, and that you can focus on your career and whatever else you want. And there are going to be no downsides to it and no repercussions to your biology if and when you do use your eggs in the future. But the reality is it's not 100% guaranteed. And the more you delay your fertility, the more time you're going to spend, or the more effort you're going to spend trying to catch up for it or make up for it later. So I appreciate, how open you are about having used IVF. And I think, like whatever people choose to do in terms of reproductive technology, that's their choice. But my concern is when people are not getting all the information that they need to make good decisions for themselves. And I see many young women in their 20s freezing their eggs. And again, like I said, I think women focusing on their career is wonderful. But if you as a young woman want to have a family, you have to keep in mind that your biology is limited. That window is very unforgiving after a certain point. And at age 35 is roughly when women's fertility cuts in half. Mm-hmm. And so that's why people put such an emphasis on that age. It's not to scare women or to try and keep them from progressing in their careers. It's to say realistically, yes, you can try to have a baby after that point, and it's not impossible, but it's going to be much more difficult. And in the investigation I did for Sextinction, I found that you can go in these clinics. They have their websites have these egg freezing calculators to tell you how many eggs to freeze. And so at 35, if you freeze 10 eggs, you have a 50% chance of having one baby. So that's with 10 eggs. And then if you want more than one baby, that percentage goes down. So just to give you an idea of, how many eggs you're going to have to freeze. And also the process of egg freezing is not a walk in the park. It can be very, emotionally challenging because there are a lot of highs and lows in terms of if it works when you're going through the different stages. Did it go according to plan? Is there a setback? And, you're going to have to do things over again. You're going to have to start the whole process over again. You have to take, in many cases, a whole bunch of different medications and shots that you self-inject to stimulate your follicles to create more eggs, and then another shot to release all the eggs, which I ask in the book, at what point did a woman ever produce more than one or maybe two eggs a month and then release them all at the same time? That would not have been good for her. So you have to wonder, what is that doing to our psychology and to our body? And then also the process itself of retrieving the eggs, you take a very large needle that goes up your vagina, pierces through the vaginal wall into the ovary, and sucks out the eggs, which I don't imagine is, again, a very wonderful experience to go through. My understanding is you are under general anesthesia when you do it, but still, I don't know that most women are aware of this until they actually undergo it. And then you don't know that the eggs are going to survive freezing And then if they are used, defrosting, if you do fertilize them and implant the embryo into your uterus, that it's going to be successful, all of these things. And for some women, they may not freeze their eggs until their late 30s or their 40s, at which point the chance of success decreases furthermore. So I don't say this to shame women. I just want, to raise awareness that I don't think it's sexist to emphasize biology, and to really say to young women to be thinking about these issues or these questions very, very early on. I would say even when you first go off to college, if you decide to, or when you're finishing high school, because that's when you're going to have the most exposure or the potential to meet as many men as you probably will in one setting, versus once you get into the workforce, it's going to be much harder to meet men, right? Because that's really frowned upon post Me Too. So yeah, just to push back on, I think this idea that women should be one or the other. I think there is a sentiment politically that women should be totally focused on career, forget motherhood, or be completely focused on motherhood and forget about your career. And I think many women want to do both, and that's okay. Or
Yeah,
if you want to do either, that's fine too.
I mean, I know tons of women in academia and publishing. Well, you're in publishing, publishing, there's tons of women. Most of them are moms, And yeah, so on the IVF thing, I'll just riff on that for a moment just to affirm everything you said. Yeah, first of all, it's expensive. I mean, it's tens of thousands of dollars each time you do it. And we met quite a few couples that were there, like their second round, third round, fourth round. We met couples that had, twins and triplets, because you just plant a bunch of eggs and you hope you get one, but maybe you get two or three. We got lucky. We just planted one, and that's our son. Okay, so, but I had the best IVF doc in the world, Richard Paulson. He's the head of the whole IVF world Federation of whatever. That's so. I was their keynote speaker. The whole thing. He's a good friend. He's a fellow cyclist. I mean, he just lives down here in L.A. We know him and his wife, and we did everything perfect. And it was still an ordeal. I mean, I had no idea what my wife had to go through. I did nothing. I just held her hand while she injected herself with the hormones and how that changes your body. And then the surgery. Yeah, I mean, this is like a major surgery. We had to check in and do the whole IV thing. And I'm like, oh, this is, egg retrieval. We're just going to go in there and get some eggs. Like, oh, holy shit. Oh, my God. And then, I had to make my little contribution. So I'll tell you a funny story about this, because it's so dumb. Because the guys have it's like guys are clueless on these things. But so I had to make my contribution, and Doc, he likes to start early. So we had to go down there at like 6 a.m., right? And, I haven't even had my coffee. I'm still half asleep. And he's like, gives me the cup. And says, here, go in there and give us your contribution. I'm like, well, but it's early. And then he goes, no problem. Just sit in this plastic chair. And here's an old TV with some like VHS tapes from the 90s pornography. I'm like, oh, my God, this stuff is so awful. So my wife and I go home and take care of things and come back. But again, guys think, oh, that's all there is to it. It's like, no, you have nothing to do other than make your little contribution, which is a silly story. The women have to put up with all of it. And it is really quite the ordeal. And again, we still friends with couples that have gone through this multiple times. Yeah, it's not a viable option. I do think there's a lot of abuse by corporations selling this. And now there's been two lawsuits, or there's two cases. I think they're going to end up in lawsuits of mixed. The embryos were mixed, right?
Yeah.
So the one family, I think one of the male or female was black, and the other one, I think, was the other couple had an Asian partner, and the babies were obviously not black or Asian. It was just. And in the one case, they found the other match. The other couple had the other baby. And the problem is that they didn't discover this until like months into it. So you've been breastfeeding and you're attached and the whole bonding family thing. And all of a sudden, that's not your kid. And they want it back. It's like, whoa, I mean, this is huge.
But can you imagine, too, in those cases, it's because the baby didn't resemble the father, my understanding, right? Like, or the baby just looks so different that there were questions. And imagine how many cases, potentially, I have no proof of this, but just potentially, in which it happens where something gets switched, but the families have no idea because the child resembles the parents enough not to raise suspicions.
Right.
Or there are cases when the doctors also are unethical, and they use their own sperm in place of the donor father's
sperm. That guy
sperm.
in Indiana, he fathered like 75 children or something.
Yeah.
So the woman discovered it through 23andMe. Like, you can track your relatives. And she's like, oh, my God, I have all these relatives. I had no idea. It's like, oh, they all came from that doc.
So sad.
So bad, yeah. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of abuse there, and so it's very risky. I was going to add something else on that. Well, then there was like the Graham Nobel Prize sperm bank that nobody ended up using because people have these crazy eugenics ideas, and so forth. Yeah, I mean the technology is good if you want a baby and you're too old. It's just there's a physical medical problem. Okay, but that's always the case where then it gets extended out and it gets abused.
Yeah, like I think it should be something that is not a first line of approach in terms of if you can do this naturally.
Yes.
I would say that's probably the not only easier, but it just makes more sense intuitively, right? As a human being, and just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should.
Well, as a guy, I'll tell you, most of the guys I meet, they didn't want kids. Like, I didn't want kids. And I still meet young men that are like, I don't know if I ever want kids. I can just tell you, it's exactly how I felt. I never want kids. And then I had a kid and went, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. I don't know what I was thinking. And that's what I tell them. I think that's when it's your own. Right. Oh, I know what I was going to say about the mixing up the babies. So there is some small percentage. No one knows exactly, 3% maybe to 10%. I think you had closer to 10% of what is it, non-paternity
cuckolding. Yes.
Cuckolding.
Yes.
Yeah. So there at the maternity ward, the guy standing there is not the father of the baby, right? When the mother's in giving birth. And there's another study showing that the grandparents are more likely to say how much the newborn looks like the father than the mother, and that there's an evolutionary reason for that. It's just that really is your baby, not a baby, but a baby.
Yeah, because especially back in the day before there was DNA testing or before there were even mirrors, so a man might not. I mean, if we go back far enough, that a man or a male, say member of our species, could not see what he looks like. To have other family members assuring him that that child looks like his will reinforce his investment in the child. But I was astounded. I mean, some people have taken issue with that 10% statistic. If you look at something like divorce rates and you see that just under half of marriages end in divorce, and one of the most common reasons why people end their marriage is because of infidelity. So this is like 60% of the time. I'm not surprised it's as high as 10%. I would expect it to be even higher, which is probably really devastating for people to hear. But when you read the case studies of families where they do paternity testing, and in many cases it's when you have a child that has a genetic disorder. And so in order for the child to have this disorder, both parents have to have the disorder. And so the father will say, but I don't have this disorder. And they'll do the actual sequencing and see that he doesn't have the disorder. And that's how they find out that he's actually not the biological father. And there was one family I remember that this man had he believed 4 children with this woman. And it turned out after he did that with the sequencing with one child, he found that I think only 1 or 2 of the kids were actually his and the other 2 were not. So, I mean, this is so awful. The things that you learn about human sexual behavior. But I wanted to mention with your question about like young men not wanting children. And I think just this larger movement, say, of younger generations moving away from marriage and moving away from having kids. I think one of the reasons why women are not as interested in motherhood is because, and you look at statistics, okay, if women are in 1 in 7 couples, women are the primary breadwinner. So they make more money than their husband, or they make all of the money and he stays at home and raises the kids. So even in those cases, the woman is doing most of the childcare as well as most of the housework. And she's also more likely to file for divorce, more likely to experience domestic violence, more likely to be cheated on by her spouse. So I don't think women, when they make this decision, they necessarily know all of these things, but intuitively they know they're going to be doing most of the childcare because they give birth to this child, and they're going to be probably doing most of the chores, and you're also making all the money or most of the money that your family's living on. So most women are saying, understandably, why am I signing up for this, especially if I can't meet a guy who makes as much money as I do or is not as focused on his career as I am. So I think that's part of the issue. I think for young men, many of them are just so disillusioned with dating, and also divorce. The fact that women do file for divorce at 70% of the time, the fact that family court is biased in favor of women and giving them sole custody. So I hear about this from very many young men who say this is why they don't want to get married. You know, marriage is not, and having kids is not something that is beneficial to men anymore. This is what they say to me. So just wanted to, I guess, give them a chance to have their concerns addressed. But again, I think both sexes have something potentially to lose by being invested and committing to the opposite sex. And it's a question of finding the right person. I don't think the issue is everyone, all men and all women are terrible and there's no good people anymore, right?
Yes.
I think it's more just like the vetting process has probably gotten more difficult and some people may not make the best choices sometimes.
All right, last question. Are you optimistic or pessimistic or realistic for the, I don't know, next 50 years? Do you think we can turn this around?
I'm generally an optimist, honestly, with sextation, though. I'm quite devastated and afraid of what the future holds for us.
Yeah.
And so I really hope that this book speaks to people's concerns. I mean, I've heard about this from people from all walks of life in terms of what they're noticing, societal trends, things that seem a little bit out of place and they don't know why it's happening. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that this can be a guide for people to inform their own decisions and also so that we don't make the same mistakes we did with screens and social media and look at the way that it has, I think, really divided society along political lines, according to sex, according to all these other factions, and it hasn't been helpful. So yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention, if people you can see with the book that you have there, if you don't necessarily want to be walking around with a book that's screaming sex, there is an ebook, an audiobook that's read by me, as Michael said, and you can also
put it in a brown paper bag.
Yeah, you can put a brown paper bag, or you can take the cover off and it's just a black cover underneath.
That's right. Here we go. We'll look. There it is.
There.
Okay. Nice and safe.
So no one will think you're a deviant now.
That's right. No, that's great. Or just listen to the audio version. It's a great read. Super interesting. I love that on the cover you're described as a sex neuroscientist. How cool is that?
I love it.